Welcome to the Herbert C. Kelman Seminar on International Conflict. And my name is Donna Hicks, and I'm the chair of the seminar. And I want to thank you all, first of all, for joining us today. I know it's a busy time, and we're just delighted to have people from all over the world join us to hear this wonderful presentation by Tim Shriver. I also wanted to point out that this seminar is co-sponsored by the Program on Negotiation at Harvard Law School. And I want to thank Susan Hackley, the managing director, Diane Long, and Anna Chang for all the help with making this wonderful event possible. Now, we have our topic, as you know, today is what will it take to bring our country back together again? And I personally think that Tim Shriver is just the right person to help us try to envision what the next step should be to address that challenge. And in a minute, I'm going to introduce him. But before I go any further, I want to just explain the format of the seminar. We will give Tim about 40 minutes to present his work. And then after that, we are going to open the rest of the time up for Q&A with you. And please, if you have a question, put it in the Q&A function. So now let me just tell you a little bit about Tim Shriver. He's the longtime chairman of the Special Olympics, best-selling author, founding force of the social and emotional learning movement, film producer, husband, and father. In 2018, he began asking new questions. How could the social and emotional learning teaching skills like empathy and self-awareness help the country? How could the example of the athletes of Special Olympics provide a model for a divided country? Hundreds of young people, faith leaders, educators, philosophers, scientists, activists, and political figures have joined this conversation. Together, they came to the conclusion that in spite of the divides, the world is hungry for ideas that unite. Thus, Tim and his colleagues founded Unite, the collective for common purpose, crossing divides to address problems that can only be solved together. As the launch of Unite neared, COVID-19 became a pandemic, and suddenly humanity's interdependence and need for connection became the leading themes of these human events. Seeing the need, the group agreed to start this work early, and the call to unite became Project One. So Tim Shriver, it's wonderful to have you here. You've been a good friend and colleague during this whole Unite project, and I'm thrilled that you agreed to be here with us today to share your insights. So please, it's yours, Tim.
Thank you so much, Donna. And I gather Herb Kelman is maybe participating or joining us indirectly by phone, or maybe he'll see this later. And I just want to say at the outset, what an honor it is to be involved in any conversation named after her, but also following in Professor Kelman's extraordinary legacy and in his tradition, if I can put it that way, the work going back a half a century now or more in some respects, pioneering the use of psychology and the social sciences to think through problems of deep-seated conflict in the tough spots and in the spots that are also more familiar. So Professor Kelman, it is an honor to join you. Donna, I'll say a little bit more about your extraordinary work, and I want to just thank everyone. I was taking notes as people were joining, saying, oh, I was going to recognize the people because we have people from as far away as Hong Kong and Moscow, but then I ran out of space on my little note card here. Lisbon, Montreal, Athens, British Columbia, Brazil, Norway, Philippines, Germany, Dublin, Alaska, Israel, Italy, the Netherlands, all over the United States. I'm sure I missed some. But it's wonderful to be with so many friends and colleagues and allies in this work and to have such an international grounding. I'm going to speak a little bit more about the United States today than I might otherwise do, but I think and I hope the messages and the skills and the broader framework will resonate well beyond the United States as we think about this work internationally. So let me start with this image here, which might be familiar to many of you. It's an image of the Earth. It's called Earth Rising. It was taken in the late 1960s. The astronauts thought when the human beings saw the Earth in this view, in this perspective, it would change us. We would see the absence of borders, the absence of the restrictions that we impose on one another by culture, by language, by history, by all the perspectives that we bring to our daily lives, that we'd see this fragile, small planet hanging in the middle of this gorgeous universe, rising in its own way in light, and it would make us have a change of heart. And the words at the bottom of the screen were spoken just before this photograph was taken by a young, still young. I mean, as we look back, we forget a young Baptist preacher in the United States, the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King, who said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only light can do that. Hate cannot drive out hate. Only love can do that." I offer these words at the beginning. And I offer them as an invitation, not just to think about conflict and uniting, but to experience it yourself. So I invite you to, if you will, to bring to mind a moment in your own lives. It could have been today. It could have been this week. It could have been over the recent holidays in the United States. Was there a moment where light drove out darkness? Can you place in your own experience what it felt like when you last noticed that love driving out hate? And I invite you to bring it to mind, because the work we're going to discuss here is not easy. And many will look at this picture and hear my words, or even look at these words and remember Dr. King and say, "Nice pictures, good quote, unrealistic. Come on, gang, let's get serious here. There are real problems. There are structural problems. There are power games being played. There's hatred. There's violence. Light, love, a universal vision. Come on." So we're going to need to be strong internally to do this work as much as we are intellectually. And so I hope you can carry, just for a moment, whatever image just came to your mind, whatever moment reminded you that, yes, it is possible that love can drive out hatred, that light can drive out darkness. And I would venture to say, borrowing from Margaret Mead, it's the only thing that can help us change the world. Now, that's a pretty bold statement, but let me at least try my best to see if I can prove it to be the case. So this is the book. Donna mentioned it briefly, that I was lucky enough to sneak onto one of the New York Times bestseller lists at one point with this book, but I don't share it with you to sell the book, but more to tell you a quick story. I was on my way to do a book event when the book first came out, and I got on an elevator in a hotel in the South in the United States, and a guy was already on the elevator, and he looked over at me, and he had big cowboy hat on, blue jeans, big silver belt buckle, cowboy boots, and he looked over at me. I was just going up 2 floors, so I pushed the button, and he looked over at me and he said, "Did anybody ever tell you you look like a Kennedy?" And I was sort of distracted, not paying too much attention, but the doors opened up and I said, "Yeah, I have heard that before." And as I started out of the elevator, he said, "Well, that must really piss you off, eh?" And I looked back and I had a little laugh, but I share the story because, not to judge this guy who saw me visually, I mean, the quintessential moment of judging a book by their cover, jumped to a potential conclusion of a relationship identity in me, and then jumped further to the assumption that if I had that identity, I would be angry. Now, all that is done in a split second. It's the way human beings interact, right? It's part of our wiring to jump quickly to conclusions based on the cover of the book. Label, sort, friend and foe, opposition and support. All that happened in that one brief moment. And it is that instinct to other, to blame the other for whatever feelings we have. It goes all the way back to the book of Leviticus, for those of you interested in biblical versions of this, to the scapegoat mechanism, where we find some discomfort or tension in the group and we decide to put the pain, the anger, the frustration on the other and to chase the other away. Because presumably, by blaming someone else for our problems, we can make them go away and create peace within our own group. The adage here you've all heard is, nothing unites a group more than hatred of another. A war. People say, well, we need a war to unite us. Why? Because we finally got a perfect scapegoat, someone we can hate to the point of wanting to kill them. That will unite us. That mechanism, scapegoating, is, in my view, today out of control. Having a little hard time here with my slides. So here's statistics from the United States. These are relatively recent. Many of them you've seen before, people saying we're more divided than ever. I call your attention to the one in the middle of the page in the right column. 1 in 4 Americans, I don't know if this is true in other countries, have ended a personal relationship, either a close friend or a family member, due to the political structure in which we currently live, the culture of division. This is a pandemic. Yes, you've heard it said, we have pandemics of inequality, pandemics of disease, pandemics of racism. We have a pandemic of divisiveness, division. It is its own problem. And in the United States, it has led us to the point where at 245 years of age, most Americans think we're at our low point. You can almost hear the echoes of the work of addiction, people who say, when you bottom out, you've lost any sense of control of your life. It almost feels like, in some sense, people feel we're bottoming out. We've lost this sense of shared meaning. Now, it can get complicated and it can get simple. But this is a natural reaction. Half the people will look at this image and see what? Write it down. What do you see first? You can say it out loud. You're not going to be heard. You see a duck or a rat. Do you see a rabbit? Do you see a duck? You see, wait a minute, I can't see the other, is often the first reaction. I can only see one or the other. But of course, it just depends on your perspective, right? So I would argue that what we're seeing here at this headline here, again, I'm going through these slides quite quickly. Our country, the world, is divided because we've lost one piece of the puzzle that's essential: relationships of shared meaning. Now, think of a synonym for relationships of shared meaning. What's a group? Is it an association, a club, a relationship, a church, a civic organization, an ethnic group? At the largest level, it tends to be, at least historically, our politics. That's where we define the relationships of shared meaning. The group, the national identity, some would say we now need an earth identity, a planetary identity. But for many of us, we live within countries, and if the country is broken at the sense of shared meaning, all these institutions, the breakdown of all these institutions, churches, civic organizations, employment, structures of political parties, and so on, only serve to exacerbate the fact that our politics is making us sick. Not just stuck, not just polarized, but sick. Emotionally, physically, spiritually sick. And therefore, you have to conclude that if we don't address the source of the sickness, at least that piece of the source, we're not going to get better. Our premise, Donna alluded to about 2 years of research, which has produced a wonderfully simple, I hope, slide. There are 3 components to the problem that we have seen. And again, none of these should be news to any of you. First of all, we need a new set of skills. And this is easy for me because I like ways of remembering things. We need new skills, we need new stories, and we need new solutions to problems of the whole. You could say, well, what about just doing one or the other? Great, except we're not going to get there according to everything we looked at, and we looked at a lot, polling data to philosophers, to spiritual masters, to anthropologists, to social scientists, to neuroscientists, to psychologists, to political science. We looked at a lot of data, spiral dynamics, you name it. And our conclusion is that we are in the midst of birthing new sets of skills to live as uniters. We need a new story, a new narrative that helps us define it, and we need new strategies for solving problems of the whole. We need all three. So I'm going to go through these very quickly with the hopes that they will trigger in you some recollection of your own. Now, let's start with skills. Here's a framework. I hope you've seen this before. I hope I could call on Donna to see if she can pass the test. But these dignity principles have been developed and sharpened through decades of work in high conflict areas. The acceptance of the dignity of the other, the principles that follow from these practices have been shown in South Africa, in Northern Ireland, around the world. Many of you, I'm sure, have used the dignity practices and dignity principles. They are a new skill set, a new toolkit. Negotiations, yes, but these skills, we've seen these being used in women's groups in Latin America. We see them being used in domestic situations where conflict exists in communities and in families. These principles can form the framework of very complex but very user-friendly skills that are needed to transpose these age-old conflicts that we find ourselves in, that othering sense, and shift the framework to one that unlocks creative solutions. Now you say, this is too complicated. Well, let's start with one very complex skill. Let me try to highlight one. I know this is Harvard, so you can take on complexity. I know you're from all over the world. I hope you don't mind starting with the difficult one. Can you turtle? Now, you may say, wow, this is going deep fast. It is. It's going as deep and as fast as a kindergartner or a first grader can go, which is not easy for those of us who are a few years removed from first grade. But this is a skill taught to many 6 and 7 and 8-year-olds in schools today under the heading of social and emotional learning that helps children learn how, when they feel angry, to stop yourself. And you could almost do this if you're at home or wherever you are. And again, no one's watching. Put your arms on your shoulders and pretend you draw yourself in like a turtle. And take 3 deep breaths and calm down. Do positive self-talk. Just try it. You can mute me if you want. And try to remember that when you get angry, the first and sometimes the most complex thing to do is to take a breath, to gain that one little sense of perspective that removes you from the immediate reactivity of a problem into a larger wholeness. Now, I know this is hard, but imagine if political figures were invited at the beginning of their debates to turtle. Now you say, oh, this is ridiculous. He's off on his own craziness. I'm not at all believing this to be unrealistic. The format we have for debates right now is really a prize fight. We've just been through this in the United States. Prize fights, knockout punches, blows to the head, all this framework. What is it actually producing for us in the way of actually solving problems? I would argue nothing. I would rather have seen the presidential candidates in my country both modeling the turtle. And again, I'm not being crazy here. Here's another set of examples. Here's skills where you see the dignity principles brought to life. This is taught to 9th graders in schools now under social and emotional learning through a program called School Connect. Learn the historical figure of Abraham Lincoln. Listen to the quote, I don't like that person. I must get to know that person better. Now, you can see on the right side of the slide here, strategies for actually doing this work. And kids can learn these strategies, learn how to presume positive intent in the midst of a debate. Learn how to disagree without being disagreeable. Learn the practice of the sensei who says you have to be empty in order to learn or understand the other. These are not skills that are foreign to us. They're just not common enough in the way in which we prepare our children and prepare people in our workplaces, in our political life, to shift the culture. You're going to get to see me interview Becca as part of what we call United, where we're profiling teachers who are in classrooms teaching skills to children that we believe, and I hope you'll agree after you get to see Becca, we believe could be terrific for the culture. So, Becca, a lot of Americans, not just parents, not just kids, are dealing right now with lots of conflict. You created something you were telling me about called the Conflict Crew, where you got second graders. Now we're talking kids who are 8 years old to be helpful to other kids in reducing conflict. Tell us a little bit about the Conflict Crew and how you taught it and what you actually taught the kids.
Sure. So what I did was I picked out 3 students in my second grade class who had good leadership qualities, great communication skills. And I told them, I have this idea of a group that can work together with other students in our class to help solve conflict with each other. And they really were so into it and so about it. We started discussing what types of questions they would need to ask if they were with 2 students that were having a conflict with each other. So they came up with 3 questions that they would ask. But the first question was, what happened? They really wanted to know, what happened in the situation with the conflict so that we can hear both sides of the story. The second question was, how did that make you feel? Because in my class, we really want to make sure that we're talking about our feelings and not glazing over that. That's something that's super important because even as adults, we tend to bottle that up and we don't talk about it enough. Whenever students are in conflict and they hear how what they did made someone else feel, it helps build that empathy for them because maybe they felt that way before too. So the third question was, what do we need to do to fix this? Because whenever we create a conflict or create an issue, we really want to restore that relationship. And so it kind of built as the year went on. Maybe a student had a conflict in my room, or whenever they were in art class or PE. And I would just say, would you like to have a conflict crew with that person later? And they would say yes. And then I would let the conflict crew, take over. It's really powerful for the children that I'm teaching that they're able to start learning those skills at a young age. And I just am trying to picture them in the future and they have strong emotional intelligence. I'm just really excited to see where our world will be then.
You've not only focused kids on how to learn the skills to resolve conflict, but you've created a culture where you feel seen and valued, where your names are known, where your personal stories are understood, and even in a virtual world where you can feel connected to one another. If I just think of that recipe, feeling valued, feeling known, seen, understood, and when conflict arises, being able to trust that there's a great second grader who's going to help me through it, I think the country would be a lot better off. Just to say to viewers, to listeners, there are ways to learn these skills. Becca's teaching them to second graders. We can all learn them. And maybe it's time we tried. Just imagine a world where all these kinds of kids who are educated in this way grow up. I just have to believe if we get this right, this first piece of the puzzle is already being birthed in the culture. It's being birthed in our schools, new skills. It's being birthed in conflict resolution with the dignity principles. It's being birthed in business. We're just not paying enough attention to it quite yet, right? So the skills framework, the new skills that require that we, instead of othering and scapegoating, find ways to transform our pain and our fear into understanding and work and collaboration towards peace and justice. All of a sudden, maybe not all of a sudden, maybe it's going to take decades. I hope it would be wonderful if it were all of a sudden. We begin to have in the culture the capability to reduce division and promote a healthier and in some sense, much, much happier and flourishing future for our citizens. So that's skills. Story's going to go quickly. Donna alluded to the fact that we began our work at Unite to try to build the storytelling mechanism. If you watch a lot of news right now, most polls say the more you watch, the more unhappy you are, because, in my view, you are being initiated into what we call the outrage industrial complex, a business model that instead of offering you real information, offers you affirmation for the fears and anxieties and angers you have, further tightening the noose of fear and anxiety and indifference that you may already have, and strengthening your fear and hatred of others. That's what news, that's what the storytelling mechanism in our politics does for us today. So you may have heard President Obama say this recently. The critical need in the culture today is a new version of storytelling, a new version of the media. So we gave it our shot. We had a 25-hour live stream, and we asked Republicans and Democrats, rich and poor, ex-convicts and ex-presidents, people who were homeless and people living in mansions, heartland, coastland, 25 hours, entertainers, political figures, you name it. Here's the 3-minute highlight reel. And I invite you at unite.us to go to any of these videos. They're all extraordinary human beings. I dare say you won't be disappointed if you just sample any of them. Here's the highlight reel, and we'll just run it quick.
Merhaba. Ciao. Hello.
Hi, how are you?
Nie wszystko super.
My name is Archbishop Thabo Makgoba, joining this call to unite from Cape Town in South Africa.
I am so privileged to be with you here in Montgomery, Alabama.
Coming to you from Manila, Philippines.
I am joining the call to unite to bring the joy of story time to children around the world.
My call is to make sure that we unite people by feeding them.
I've been doing my best to spread positivity.
Develop the skills of empathy and compassion.
Take a stand for those who need help the most.
Slow down our own breath, our own being, our own body in this particular moment.
Hundreds of millions of families across the world find themselves at some of the lowest points that they've ever seen.
We're united in grief. We're united in horror.
And while we're all suffering in our own unique capacity,
we need not suffer alone.
In the face of our pain, we must not forfeit our dignity.
We are aware now as we have never been before.
This is the perfect opportunity for us to do what we're doing right now, to reach out, to bring people together.
I think of it as a massive reset for the world.
We certainly need a new normal.
The question really is, what type of normal do we want to get back to?
When we come together like this, it gives us the greatest opportunity to shift the way the world looks today and to really reimagine what the world will look like tomorrow.
People are capable of making huge, radical behavioral changes when they're motivated.
We don't have to wait until pandemic is over to unite. You know, this dream could come true right now.
We have a simple principle as uniters. We believe that we are one. Mothers and fathers, all kinds of monks, musicians, dancers, and all the gifts that humanity has to offer.
We all breathe the same air. We all cherish our children's future.
There's no time for love like now.
This is the calling that we all are being urged to answer.
This is who we are.
Each of us at this moment needs to be a leader in our personal life, a leader in our communities, and a leader in the world.
May we all find our interconnectedness,
our place in humanity.
We rise or fall together, and we are determined to rise.
powerful force in the world is the individual who has realized their power to do good.
We're not just doing it for ourselves, but we're doing it for the sake of the entire planet.
Together, we can be able to walk this path towards healing.
I encourage our global community to answer the call for someone else by giving and volunteering.
Not just calling for unity, but take action.
Take action right here and right now.
We have to do more.
So we have to act as one.
We have to unite in common purpose. So join us in service, in generosity, in sharing your ideas. And when you hear the call, answer. Here I am. Send me.
So that's a sense of what a storytelling version of us might look like. Now, we're not naive here. I know that's not the only story that's been told during the pandemic. And in fact, this particular broadcast was on May 1st. In some ways before the pandemic itself became politicized and became a source of tension and anger and hostility between people, even the pandemic, even something over which human beings could only exercise control if we worked together. Even that was politicized. So this is hard work, telling this story instead of that story. But we've got to stay at the storytelling function because it's not just skills. Skills are not enough. If the master story, if I can put it that way, if the dominant story in our culture is about hatred and division, it will drown out the creative energy and the starving majority's hunger. So let me just, with a final sense here, offer solutions. We've looked at solutions, people who have actually done the work of transcending divisions to unite in different times in history. We looked at the abolitionist movement. We looked at the settlement house movement. We looked at the New Deal and the war on poverty. We looked at many of the military organizations. We looked at many of the ways in which civic organizations, Rotary clubs and Lions clubs and the like came together across divisions. And we tried to distill, what did they all have in common? What are the practices of the uniters that actually, as you heard in the video, shifted people from talking about it to action? So I've distilled 4. This is not as scientific as I'd like it to be, but I invite all of this community to think with us. If we had to retrofit onto the great uniting moments in history in your countries, in your communities, in your businesses, what were the key ingredients? Maybe we could distill this further. I applied this lens as best I could to a couple of movements that I looked at, and then I'll show you how I applied it to one I know very well. We call it right now the work of both and thinking. Here's what we saw. We saw that uniters have faith, lots of different types of faith, but they see that we are given our dignity, each of us individually. Donna's spoken about this so beautifully over the years. Each person has dignity. This is a faith, I call this a faith starting point. They all have some love component in them. Sounds soft, but it's true. It's not just each person individually, but they see that we're one with one another. They're somehow able to not only recognize that each individual person is distinct, but that we are all in it together. There's a lot of anger, what John Lewis called good trouble type anger, right? The anger that says, I cannot accept the humiliation or the oppression of others. That's common in the uniter movements. And there's joy. There's a sense of flow, of flourishing, of extraordinary happiness by seeing the little bits of goodness that emerge when we repair the breach, to quote the prophet Isaiah. So here's an example of these 4 solutions at work in a movement I know. This is an image of the way in which most of our countries treated people with intellectual disabilities in the 20th century. This is an institution where people were sent for life, divided for life, because of one single measure, not a human quality, a measure of human intelligence, intellectual disability. And the quote at the bottom of this page is the United States Supreme Court decision authorizing 70,000 sterilizations, forced sterilizations of people incarcerated in institutions in the mid 1920s. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Eliminate them, stop them, control them, remove them, literally remove them behind concrete walls. 200,000 Americans were in institutions like this in 1968, not 1918, 1968. Our institutional population, and these institutions, I'm sorry to say, still exist, where the idea of separation is literally embodied in the creation of a building to remove human beings who are too different to belong. We just can't live with you. You've got to go. In the face of this, my mom and others created something called the Special Olympics movement. I won't dwell on it too much but I just want you to see this image of Ajara Silla. She's standing here. This is a movement that now includes all of the countries I saw, of all of you who are here. We will have World Games in Russia very soon. We have had World Games in China. We have strong local Special Olympics programs in 190 countries now, 100,000 games in the average year at the local level. And they look like Ajara here in this moment. Faith, love, anger, and joy embodied in a solution that ended or is in the process, I hope, of forever ending the horrific, scandalous stigma that accompanies most people with intellectual disabilities. I'm sorry to say many still to this day. And you see Ajara there, this beautiful image of a 12-year-old young woman from a West African country, probably malnourished, but nonetheless standing on her medal stand. You can see what number she came in. This is both and thinking. Is Ajara a winner, or has she come in 7th? Is she an Olympic champion, or is she a special Olympic champion? Is she wise, or is she challenged? All of the above. Uniters don't see through one lens. They make the hard choice to see the world in all of its complexity and still affirm the dignity of all. I don't think we have time to watch this video. Well, I'm sorry for that, but if Donna were on, if I could see her, if she could take off her microphone, I'd ask her, even if she's not at the camera. This is a pledge written by a school about 60 miles from, well, not even 40 miles from Harvard. It's called Ponagansett, and they rewrote their school's pledge. Donna, I've changed it a little bit for this occasion. Do you mind just reading out loud what the Uniters of Ponagansett High School in Rhode Island came up with as their new school pledge? Do you mind?
This is beautiful. Of course, I'd love to read it. As a member of Harvard University, I pledge to look for the lonely, the isolated, the left out, the challenged, and the bullied. I pledge to overcome the fear of difference and replace it with the power of inclusion. Tim, that's beautiful. I choose to include. And this is probably the most important thing. I choose to include.
It's a choice, isn't it, Donna?
It is.
It's a choice. We are given the choice to be dividers or uniters. There is no law in most places that can force us to do either. There is no skill that will definitively change how we see one another. There is no story that we can guarantee will create a generation of uniters. There are choices. And when we see young people with and without Down syndrome, with and without disabilities, with and without all the variations of the human family, color and religion and race and ethnicity and background and history. And we see young people learning to turtle and calm down, learning to disagree without being disagreeable, learning to unite, learning to give their all like Ajara did. You know, all she had to come in seventh and still raise her arms and say, I did it. My bravery counts for something. My decency counts for something. I am seen in the eyes of the world for what I have to give. We start to craft a moment where each of us can choose and all of us can choose together. My brothers and sisters and friends, I hope these stories have given you some sense that we are at a moment of enormous possibility. You've even heard President-elect Biden use this word over and over again, possibility, possibility. Pharrell Williams, pop stars, they're talking this way. Look at what he says. I'm choosing empathy. I'm choosing inclusion. I'm choosing love for everybody, just trying to lift everyone. Even when I disagree with someone, he said, I'm wishing them the best. You know, you could put that on a button. Even when I disagree with you, I'm wishing you the best. Because we can't win the other way. A divided world can't make it. The planet can't make it. Our countries can't make it. Human beings can't make it. Children can't make it. We don't have the liberty of going it alone anymore, for better or for worse. I leave you with one of my role models. This is Scarlett Lewis. She's pictured here with her little boy, Jesse. Jesse was, I think, 6 at the time this picture was taken. He was gunned down at Sandy Hook Elementary School, together with over 20 other children and teachers. Scarlett could have gotten immersed in the political battles in the United States over guns, for or against, Republican or Democrat, rich or poor, black and white, cops and civilians. Instead, she chose to enter the field of social and emotional learning, and she, together with experts, wrote a curriculum, and it's called Choose Love. Again, choose. She dedicates the curriculum, it's now all over several states and in many countries. She dedicates the curriculum, of course, to her little boy, to Jesse. But she also dedicates it to Adam Lanza, who took her son's life. Because from her point of view, if Adam had had the option, if he'd been taught to choose love, he might not have gone down the path he went down, and her little boy might still be alive. Now, Scarlett has the capacity to forgive that I could only hope someday to approximate, never to match. But she also has a vision and a request to each of us as we do this work, to choose to include, to choose to tell the story of unity, to choose to remember that we all breathe the same air, to choose love. And I think as a community here, some 150 or 250 of us, we have an option. We have the possibility to choose to work together, to do our part to advance the skills, the stories, and the solutions of Uniters. And I'm grateful to be included among you. Thank you all very much for your time and for all the work you do every day to advance the work of negotiation and peace building and justice. Thank you.
Oh, Tim, you exceeded every expectation. It was such an inspiration.
Thank you.
I mean, I feel like I needed this today in the midst of everything that we're dealing with now. And it just makes me want to weep. And I'm sure, 100% sure I can speak on behalf of our beloved Herbert Kelman, that he is jumping for joy right now listening to you.
I hope so. Thank you.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'm just overwhelmed by your wisdom, your integrity here, your ability to transcend all of you're modeling what it is we want
you, Donna.
to see in this country. So thank you.
you.
Now, I want to I want to pose some questions that people have asked, and because they're all great questions. This is from Wendy Lieserson, and she said, I agree that the dominant story is about a nation divided, and it needs to be changed. So it needs to be changed. So shouldn't the Democratic Party, including President Obama, stop repeating that mantra? We can call for unity without stating that we are divided. And she's asking you, do you agree?
It's a very good question. Do we actually have the counter intended effect if we keep talking about division instead of just doing the work of healing it and showing the pathway towards justice through unity? I think it is a good moment to start to check our rhetoric and to consider it more deeply. So I think it's a very good question. I for instance, I grew up my whole life hearing that you have to fight for justice, you have to fight for peace, you have to fight for dignity, you have to fight for truth. And it's very common to hear people say that, right? You have to fight. Well, I got into this work and I think, well, who am I fighting? I'm fighting them. And guess what? So is everybody else. So I even think we have to check our rhetoric on that. Now, everybody will say, well, wait a minute, are you saying that everybody's the same? No, I'm not saying everybody's the same. I'm not saying abandon your principles. I'm not saying there aren't opposing forces. I'm not saying that it doesn't take hard work and even personal sacrifice to advance your goals against the goals of others that you see or you perceive to be counteracting basic human dignity. But I am saying maybe the point is to nuance the rhetoric a little bit so that we don't use violence as the underlying framework that so guides our willingness and our capacity to work. So I think it's a very good challenge to our political leaders and also to all of us. And to me, I feel like this is a challenge to me. How do I speak with passion and commitment about the things I believe to be true without demonizing and ostracizing, even subtly humiliating people who might not see the way I see? It's tricky. It's going to require new vocabulary. And I think you're right. We all have to work at it.
Thank you, Tim. Here is another question from Farhan Siddiqui. Is the Unite movement only about and for Americans, but also it also relates to similar polarization and problems in other areas? Does the movement allow for partnerships with other parts of the world?
The answer is yes. The movement is very, very small. So we're working hard to ramp up and I see a question about Braver Angels. There's lots of, I'd say, brother and sister organizations in this space who are working on conversations, who are working on political polarization, who are working on systems, political reforms in different countries. I don't want to deceive you. I'm not the master of all those universes. There are lots of different groups. And Donna, of course, you've been at this longer than I have. So we're very much in the mix. We very much welcome partners from around the world. The Call to Unite, which you saw, has many contributions from all over the world. And I encourage you, if you're interested in the diversity of human gifts, there's on that website, there's 25 hours of content if you're bored, or if you've watched too many movies during COVID. But I think this is a global moment. And I think we all have to find new strategies. Look, the movement of migrants in so many parts of the world are stretching and straining countries, both poor and less poor. The shifting political dynamics around the world are straining personal expression. The internet is creating this massive connection and learning web, which has a counter effect of making us more fearful at times. So this is not a Republican, and it's not a Washington, D.C. movement. Our movement is not a Washington, D.C. movement. It is indeed, in many respects, a global movement, but it's going to take a lot of work and probably a fair amount of time before we can find ways to all of us collaborate and optimize each other's skills and gifts in the process.
Okay, Tim, thank you. The next question is from our colleague, Sarah Fetterman. And her question is, she thanks you for your high-intentioned work. How do you train people in the paradox that unity doesn't mean that we're always calm and peaceful? In conflict contexts, angry people are often told that they're disrupting the, quote, unity and named spoilers by those in power. Do you have any thoughts?
Fantastic question. Here's what I've noticed. Can you name the truth without labeling the person on the other side? That will require, as I put in there, anger. I just give you an example. My mom, who founded the Special Olympics movement, was very, very, very angry. And she built a movement that was very, very, very peaceful. Now, I'm not saying she had it right, but she understood at some level that the anger motivating her was drawing her towards a peace that she was hungry for. And so the inspiration, the disequilibrium of anger, my friend David Adams, a teacher, says, anger's like fire. If you control it, you can cook. If you don't control it, it burns your house down. So I don't think there's anything wrong with being involved in good trouble, in being tough-edged around injustice and oppression and the uncovering of systems of oppression and subordination and humiliation. That's necessary. I mean, W.B. Du Bois, power does not give up without a demand. I'm bastardizing the quote, but power will stay in power. We all know this. So those of us in power, when we've been in power, when we've used it in negative and selfish and oppressive ways, we have to be called out. I'm saying we have to be called out, not I have to call them out. We all have to be called out. But not put in such a corner that we react violently, right? Invited to see that there's a better way, right? Challenged to come onto the playing fields. My mom didn't take all those people who were putting people in institutions and put signs up of them on the street corner with catch this person, find this person. No, she invited them to come run track meets. And you would be surprised at how many stories of people who were working in institutions who came and shot baskets and left and changed their whole life just by shooting baskets or by playing soccer. So, there's a lure of goodness. And we can be tough in exposing oppression. But I would say the art form here is to lure people in to something better.
Yes, that's a wonderful response. The next is from Olivia Stoddard, and she says it's a very powerful and timely talk. Thanks, Tim. I've really been captivated by this. And as a parent, not a teacher, how can I help bring this kind of thinking like Becca into my kids' school?
So I'm not sure where you are, but there's a field now emerging. And I like to think that someday we'll look at educators and there'll be people who are experts in mathematics and sciences and language arts and all kinds of social studies and things like that. And then there'll be people who are also experts in child development. And guess who they will be? All the same. Someday, teachers will be trained to be experts first in children and then in science. Now, in the meantime, we have a field called social and emotional learning. There are kindergarten through 12th grade instructional programs. There are teacher training programs. There are models for planning to redesign the whole school: discipline, parent involvement, teacher training, support services, cafeterias, hallways. Does redesign the whole school to nurture the social and emotional development of the children, just like you saw Becca doing with her second graders. I would invite you, depending on where you are, to speak to your principal or speak to the superintendent or speak to the teachers. The more systemic we can make this, the better chance it has to be successful. But sometimes you got to start somewhere. And maybe your children are in classrooms where the teachers could begin to learn how to teach some of these skills. And by the time they get 3 or 4 grades ahead, they'll be ready for a PhD level class from Donna at Harvard. I'm telling you, and you think I'm kidding. I'm not kidding. I'm not kidding. The kids get it quickly. They get it quickly. They're being raised to think inclusively. Now, let's not forget this. Now, I know we have a lot of division and all that stuff, but children of this generation do not see division the way my generation did. I mean, I think my generation did pretty good, but nothing like these kids are going to do. So if we give them some basic skills, if you go and advocate for the teaching of social and emotional learning and the modeling of systems of support for social emotional learning, you could go to the CASEL website. CASEL is the organization, Collaborative for Academic, Social, and Emotional Learning, casel.org. And you'll see school guides and parent guides. And you can go to our own site, unite.us, and you'll see several lessons taught by teachers under that framework I shared, Unite Ed. But CASEL will give you the full story. At Unite Ed, you'll find, I hope, other inspirational videos that will give you some convincing material for when you go to speak to your principals and superintendents.
Okay, Tim, I think we probably have time for maybe one more question.
Okay.
And this is from Camilla Novak, and she says, to choose, we must understand that we have freedom, that we are truly free to make choices. How to guide people to realize and live this freedom. Freedom goes hand in hand with responsibility. Perhaps people are afraid to be responsible. Thank you for your insights.
Well, you know, sometimes the question is better than any answer could be. It's a beautiful question. And half of me wants to say, just live the question and you'll be fine. Quoting a little bit from Rilke there. Live that question. I guess the only additional point I'd make is that much of the work of the mystics and the great spiritual leaders of all traditions invite us to see that that sense of freedom comes even in brief moments of awareness, where we can withdraw from the clutter in the mind, from the racing of emotions, from the narratives and what we've constructed of who we are and what we have to do and all that stuff. And whether in the breath or in silence or in bodily awareness, to withdraw just enough to see that we're part of a bigger whole. And in that sense of wholeness, we find the freedom to act because we know we're safe and we know we're being held and cared for in a larger story. To me, that's the freedom that we all need to practice, I guess, in the end of the day, what is love, unconditional love for one another, and to take risks for that love. And maybe in the end of the day, that's all this is all about.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think that's it. I really think that's it, Tim. Someone has asked for your website of the organization.
Yeah.
Could you just...
So I have so many different organizations, but if you're interested in Special Olympics, that's easy, specialolympics.org. I know I mentioned that a little bit, and the Pontigansett kids and stuff like that's all there. I mentioned CASEL, the social emotional learning site, casel.org. You'll find a lot of work on schools there. And our organization, the new organization, which I'm working with colleagues around the country and around the world on, it's called unite.us. It's very, I hope, easy to remember, unite.us. It's us. Uniting us is the mission. And come there, sign up, give us your email, join our Instagram and our Facebook and our Twitter feeds as much as you can. That helps a lot, as you all know. If we join each other's, we build up more momentum and more coalition strength. We learn from each other, so invite you very much, if you're so inclined, to do that at unite.us, to follow us on social media and help shape the messages that we're trying to share with one another and teach us. We're all learners in this. And even as we learn, we need to learn more.
Well, Tim, I think you've inspired many people in this 45 minutes that you spoke and the rest of the time answering questions. It's so many wanted to know how they could get involved with what you're doing. And this is what we need. We need people like you and everybody who's there with you at Unite. You've got the most amazing team of people.
We do. We have amazing people, young and older, and people who have come out of the toughest of political battles, and people who've come out of the Peace Corps, and people who are working with kids, and people who are working in governor's offices, and people who are interested in the mystics, and people who are interested in making change happen right now, and people who are working on police brutality and COVID, and people who are working on contemplative ideas and mindfulness. And we're trying to put it all together. It's a little bit sometimes kooky, but it's our sense that this is the moment where a lot of those old boundaries have to be broken down. And Donna, we're very grateful that you're teaching us a lot about how to do that as part of our team.
Well, I think you really were successful here, Tim, at convincing people that it's time to unite. We all need to make that choice. So thank you so very much. And thank you, everyone who joined us from all over the world. The chat function has been filled with wonderful comments, and I hope you'll join me, everyone, in thanking Tim Shriver.
Thank you
For a very powerful presentation.
Thank you all for coming and join us at the Call to Unite. I think Tammy said at the Call to Unite. That's us. Thanks, everyone.